looks like we had some bipartisan legislation get passed over the weekend. The U.S. House passes $95 billion aid to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. So certainly good news for those folks. We heard from President Zelensky out with some comments thanking the U.S. Congress here. I want to know what it means politically here for our good friends down in Washington. Nathan Dean, senior policy analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. He is our go-to guy. He's the only guy in D.C. I trust to give me the straight poop here. Nathan, thanks so much for joining us yet again. From a political perspective, what happened over the last several days that Congress was able to kind of come together and get something done here? $95 billion. I mean, that's maybe not a lot for Manish Crowley, but for me, that's real money.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think from a political standpoint, the most important thing that happened here is that Speaker Mike Johnson called the bluff on all the threats to essentially remove him from office. You know, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene has this motion to vacate on the floor, and she may well, move forward with that next week. But essentially, Speaker Mike Johnson had a choice. Do I go forward with the Ukraine aid and potentially lose my position, or do I just do nothing and take the safe position politically? Now, Speaker Johnson chose to move forward with the Ukraine aid. Now, what happens next? Well, House is on recess this week, so maybe next week Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene comes back and she moves forward with her threat. Now, the Democrats have already said, or at least hinted, that they are going to save Speaker Johnson's position. So Speaker Johnson will be a GOP speaker, but it'll be a GOP speaker that has, the support of Democrats, which is not a great position that you want to be in. But ultimately, with the Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan aid going to the president's desk this week, as we anticipate it will, there's not much else that Speaker Johnson really has to do for the rest of the year. So, just other than those two or three things, I think he said, okay, we're good. We're just going to move on to the election and see what happens then.
Nathan, good morning. It's Manis. What does the Biden administration need to do to sell this to the U.S. public? We are in full election mode. $95 billion worth of aid across 3 countries. What is the message that they need to sell to make people in the United States of America believe that this was the right thing to do now?
You have an excellent question here because, Congress, as you know, writes the checks, but it's up to President Biden to actually define the strategy and say, how do you use this money and how do you work with our allies on the Ukraine situation? And that's President Biden's biggest challenge now. Now the Congress has done its job, but what happens next? There's not another aid package coming from Congress this year, and I would even argue, depending on how the election plays out, this could be it. There may not be an aid package coming next year. So if I'm President Biden, the one thing that I need to tell the American public is we've got $95.3 billion. Most of that's going back to the U.S. industrial base to replenish weapons and munitions and so forth. But here's what the strategy is going to be going forward. Additionally, if Ukraine and Russia remains in conflict going forward over the next few years, I'm the person that you want to be in charge with as opposed to President Trump. And so it's going to be a lot of outreach, both from like you just point out, a lot of outreach to our allies in the region and try and figure out how to resolve the Russia-Ukraine conflict, but also try and sell that to the American people and say, hey, I'm the right person for the job.
Nathan, it seems like Speaker Johnson, I don't know, he looks kind of good here to me. Like, A, he got this big piece of legislation done. B, he's not withholding to literally 5 or 6 representatives who can effectively hold up the whole legislative calendar. I don't know. He looks like pretty good to me all around. Is that the feeling in D.C., or is the feeling in D.C. that his goose is cooked?
No, I think there's really 2 ways to look at this. One is Speaker Johnson has done what most Republican speakers in the past have done in terms of dealing with the conservative, the very extreme conservative part of their party. And that is, delay, be open, be flexible. Things don't move as quickly as you want, and people get very frustrated by looking at headlines, but ultimately they do move things through, through the Congress. The other thing that happened is Kevin McCarthy went through this process before, and he paid the price. And, had that not happened, a lot of people have said, look, I just don't want to go through this again. So even if I don't agree that Speaker Johnson's the right person for the role, I certainly don't want to go through the exercise of trying to select another speaker. So he has that advantage. But ultimately, Speaker Johnson has been very patient, very flexible, and has worked with both of his allies and former President Donald Trump to ensure that we get to a situation where Ukraine aid passes, the threat to him is fairly low, and we're not seeing posts from President Trump on Truth Social blasting him for that decision.
I mean, What do you think that we will hear from Trump on this, Nathan? Because as you say, we haven't had the blast of anti-legislation, rhetoric calling for his scalp, etc. Do you think President Trump has other bigger issues to deal with at the moment in terms of litigation?
Yeah, I mean, if you're listening to this in New York City right now, you exactly know what President Trump's main, focus is at the moment. But what I will say is that, we have not seen much reaction from President Trump, but other than over the past few weeks, he has signaled support for this idea of a conditional aid for Ukraine. Now, the way that the law was written is that conditional aid comes in the way of forgivable loans. So a future president can essentially say, we're good at Ukraine, you don't have to pay us back. But ultimately, I think it comes down to just not wanting to offend voters. This is a very popular package with the American people. Also focus on what's going on in New York with his trial at the moment and just see, I just think that he's got other things that he wants to focus on at this point, because if he becomes president 6-7 months from now, it's all a moot point anyway. He's going to decide what the future is.
All right, Nathan, both Manus and Lisa, they have big social media games all over the TikTok thing. This is also part of this legislation here. What's going to happen with TikTok?
So we've been hearing from a lot of clients that have teenagers that are asking this question. And what we're telling is, and this is my colleague Matt Schettenhelm has been working the phones on this for almost every day now, is that you're not going to see TikTok go away before the election. You're not going to see TikTok go away, before the end of the year. Now, when this bill becomes law, the TikTok will have essentially 270 days plus 90 extra wiggle room if the president allows it to divest or to break away the operations. Now, let's just say that doesn't happen, and let's just say that TikTok just holds firm. Then you're going to see a court case. And Matt's piece, which he just put out in the terminal this morning, it's a very early look at this about the First Amendment fight, or the First Amendment argument versus the national security argument, is giving the government a 70% chance of victory here. So if you have a teenager who's concerned, this year you may be okay. 2025, they may want to go to Snapchat and Meta, which obviously saw the benefits stock-wise last week when this bill looked like it was going to pass.
I mean, I guess this is, again, for the TikTokers out there, it's a huge issue and it's a huge business. It'd be great.
Can I just say, it's the one social media that actually I'm doing. Yeah. Ironically, when I came to live in America, everybody said, do more social media. The one thing I've actually done exceptionally well at on Bloomberg's platform, I should add, not mine, is TikTok. So who would have thought that the TikTok audience want to know about bonds and dollar yen?
Exactly. What does this mean for the trade war? I mean, Nathan, I guess in D.C., what are the folks in D.C., what are they trying to do here? Is it really national security? Is it more politics? What's behind it, do you think?
It's national security. I mean, it's one of those things where, as we're going into an election, a lot of folks have said, there is this. So let me back up. TikTok has spent a lot of time and effort trying to distance themselves from China and to ensure that the data security that they have goes through American personnel, American systems, and so forth like that. But ultimately, being tough on China is good politics. Most people on Capitol Hill do believe that TikTok has a relationship with the Chinese government, and most people do not want to have 170 million Americans and their data having a relationship with the Chinese government. And so ultimately, this was an easy vote for Congress to pass. And TikTok has tried. There's been a lot of folks saying, look, TikTok just put out a piece saying we bring in $24 billion annually to the GDP in the United States. But for the American policymakers who are thinking with the national security lens, that didn't hold up, and the vote will probably most likely become law.
Yeah, this is big stuff for a lot of people out there. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out, particularly when it gets to the courts. Nathan Dean, thanks so much for joining us. Nathan Dean is our senior policy analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. He's based down in Washington, D.C. He's got his finger on the pulse of what's happening in D.C. Better him than me, I'll tell you that. But he is one of the greats down there in D.C. Coming up, we're going to